in the hell is happening? Hey, it's Nick Digilio, and hi, how are you? Thank you for checking out my YouTube channel. Subscribe, tell your buddies, tell your friends, tell you people that you hate. Check me out on Patreon. That helps out a lot. A lot of the videos that I do and some of the content that I do on my YouTube channel and my Patreon page, which is completely separate from my podcast. That stuff I do on my own. That's DIY on my own. I could use some help to keep the content going, and if you want bonus material and bonus videos that I will cut just for you, my patrons, you'll get the inside story of what really happened at WGN and some behind-the-scenes stories and some other extra videos and bonuses. You got to go to patreon.com/NickDShow. $3 a month, $9 a month, $25 a month, whatever you can donate, whatever money you can give. I can keep doing these videos, and I can give you more and exclusive stuff. So go to patreon.com/NickDShow right now. And donate some dough. I would really appreciate it. Patreon.com/NickDShow. And speaking of my podcast, new episodes drop every Tuesday and every Friday. I am with the Radio Misfits Podcast Network, the Nick D Podcast. Get it everywhere where you get your podcasts. Subscribe today. And new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. And check out RadioMisfits.com for more. All right. One of the greatest television shows in the history of television celebrated its 50th anniversary just a couple of weeks ago. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. It's one of the best shows ever, featuring the leading man that is possibly, easily, one of the funniest people that has ever been on a television show, one of the funniest people that's ever lived, but certainly one of the greatest, most memorable, and most hilarious characters in the history of television, and that would be Red Fox, and that show would be Sanford and Son. You big dummy. Welcome to my castle, your ugliness. Sanford and Son on January 14th celebrated its 50th anniversary. 50 years. January 14th, 1972, Sanford and Son debuted on NBC and became an instant hit. It was from the stable of Norman Lear, who at that time, was following up the huge success that he had with All in the Family, and he wanted sort of an African-American version of Archie Bunker, if you will, a variation on that Archie Bunker, sort of bigoted, close-minded, grumpy, but really, really funny character. And he hired stand-up comedian and unbelievable comic mind, Red Fox, who was known for his dirty albums, the dirty party albums that you would play late at night when the kids went to sleep. You would pull out the cocktails, you would grab the liquor, and you would listen to the dirty, X-rated comedy stylings of Red Fox. He was one of many who would release these party records in the 60s. They would get popular in the 60s, and he would continue to make these records and do stand-up. He would do the African-American circuit, the Chitlin circuit, and become a crossover hit on television and in nightclubs and on talk shows. And then finally he got his own show with Sanford and Son. And again, it was a show that Norman Lear created. He and Bud Yorkin were the guys who put it together. And it was one of the many, many shows that Norman Lear broke all kinds of ground with, both with its subject matter, what it talked about, socially, in terms of race and in terms of class. It was taking on issues in the country of America that nobody had ever taken on, especially in the sitcom world before. Nothing like All in the Family had ever existed before. The sitcom was always really sort of sparkly and clean, and it never, ever took on any kind of controversial issues, but Norman Lear took them on head-on. He changed television. We all know this. He absolutely changed television. And so when All in the Family came out, he was writing and creating shows like crazy. And in that period, in the 70s, nobody was doing more television. Nobody was doing better television. Nobody was breaking more ground and doing more really challenging and amazing television in the comedy world than Norman Lear was. And one of the best shows that he did was Sanford and Son. Not only do I have my t-shirt, but I have my buddy, Fred. How's it going, dummy? I'd like to thank my friend Deanna for giving me this. You got two Freds. You got formal Fred. How's it going? I'm all dressed up, dummy. And then casual Fred. He's very happy, casual. This is like when they went to Hawaii, the Hawaiian Connection 4-part episode. How's it going? We're going to Hawaii, dummy. Dummy. I love this thing. He's my friend. This is Fred. He's my friend. Anyway, I love Red Fox. I've always loved Red Fox. And I wasn't aware of who Red Fox was because when Sanford and Son debuted, I was 7. So, obviously a 7-year-old's not going to be really familiar with those party albums. I became familiar. By the time I was 8 or 9, I knew them all. I started to listen to Richard Pryor albums at like 8 or 9. My parents were like, go ahead, listen to it. He says fuck 9,000 times. He says the N-word 1,000,000 times, but go ahead, listen to it. And I thank my parents for allowing me to listen to that because my comedy sensibility would not be the same without it. But so at first, Red Fox was always like when I was a little kid and I saw Sanford and Son, I always say. And the show was based on another British show called Steptoe and Son, like All in the Family was based on a British show called Till Death Do Us Part. And it was based on a British sitcom, and they had seen this British sitcom. It was about a cantankerous junk dealer and his son. They lived together and they ran a junk business. And so they took that British series and they took it and they put it in the middle of Watts in California, and they made the two main characters African American, and it was about the social issues, the financial issues, the race issues of this old cantankerous, xenophobic, sort of racist guy and his son trying to do this, to have this junk dealership succeed in California in the early 70s. It ran for 6 seasons. It became an enormous hit. There are 136 episodes of it. I've seen probably every episode multiple times, some more than others. It is also known for its incredible theme song by Quincy Jones, the greatest television theme song of all time. There are a lot of great TV theme shows out there, songs out there, lots of great TV theme songs, but nothing is even remotely close to the theme from Sanford and Son, which, if you didn't know that, is actually called the song is actually called The Street Beater. That's the actual title of the Sanford and Son theme by Quincy Jones. The greatest TV theme song of all time. So in addition to just being hilarious and having one of the greatest and funniest men ever as your lead, having one of the greatest TV theme songs of all time, and an incredibly brilliant creator like Norman Lear, boom. Right out of the gate, the show does incredibly well. The ratings are through the roof. I'd be hard-pressed to find a funnier show during that time period. The first 3 seasons of Sanford and Son are brilliant, are absolutely brilliant, consistently fucking hilarious, laugh out loud funny. If you're flipping around and you see some reruns of Sanford and Son or a small mini marathon or something on cable, and it's from the first 3 seasons, you can pretty much bet that every one of those episodes in that marathon is going to be fucking brilliant and hilarious because the first 3 seasons were great. Started to fall off in quality as the show went on, and by the end, Red Fox, didn't even want to be there. It got to the point where it was just Fred would hardly get out of his chair. It got to the point where like Esther would come in and he would insult her, and that was the whole show. He would just say, "You big dumb man." It got the show really, the quality dropped huge. Right around season 5, the first 3 seasons, flawless, brilliant, hilarious. Season 4, for the most part, really good, but there was a chunk of that season where Red Fox wasn't on it. Season 5, it started to falter, and by the end, the show was pretty awful. By the last couple of seasons, pretty awful. Red Fox was just phoning it in. They added this subplot about a hotel called the Sanford Arms that they opened up. They brought in Nancy Culp from the Beverly Hillbillies, and they started bringing in different characters, and Red Fox clearly had lost any interest in doing the show. He liked the paycheck, he just didn't like doing the show. But that first 3 seasons and a half, nothing better. So many great characters. And Red Fox was really, he was a guy that was very loyal to his friends, to the guys that he did the Chitlin circuit with, to those African-American comedians that he worked with, for pennies and for no money. And he gave those people jobs on the show. They became regulars on the show. And that includes LaWanda Page, who would infamously become Aunt Esther. And Aunt Esther, one of the greatest characters in the history of sitcoms, Red Fox got her the gig. He knew LaWanda Page from her incredible, also one of the most filthy comedians ever, LaWanda Page. Ever. Red Fox got her the gig as Esther, and she became, a household name on Esther. One of the most memorable characters in the history of television. He also got guys like Don Bexley, who was a comedian that he knew. He got him a gig as Bubba, and he became a regular character. Slappy White, for God's sake, Slappy White, legendary African-American comedian, just a legend, doing nightclubs and all kinds of stuff and working through the times when only white people could watch him in nightclubs. Paid his dues big time. He and Red Fox were best buddies. They worked together a ton, and he became Melvin on the show. He wasn't on as long as like Bubba was, or some of the other, like on Esther was, but he was on for several episodes in the first couple of seasons as Melvin. So Slappy White, and then there was Leroy Daniels, and there was Skillet. There was Skillet Mayhand, and these guys played Leroy and Skillet, and they were friends of his. So Bubba, the guy who played Bubba, Don Bexley, the guys Leroy and Skillet on Esther, and they were all friends. Slappy White, Melvin, they were all friends of Red Fox, and he hired them. Now, the other best friend on the show was Whitman Mayo, who played Grady, and Grady became a very popular character to the point where he got his own spinoff, which only lasted 1 season and 10 episodes, and it was terrible. But these guys were Grady, Whitman Mayo, was brought in by NBC. He was brought in by the producers. He was not a friend of Red Fox's at all. Did not work with him very often. They got along fine on the set, but Red Fox was not happy, that this guy was brought in. They became friends. They worked together, and they were very, very funny on the show together. But this was an NBC hire. This was not somebody that Red Fox knew from the Chitlin days. This was a guy that they brought in, and this was a guy that NBC wanted to push. And so they put Grady and they got to the point where they wanted Norman Lear and Bud Yorkin and all the creative writers and stuff to put Grady in every episode, at least have him come in. To the point where, as I mentioned before, Red Fox, right at the end of season 3, beginning of season 4, boycotted the show because he wanted more money. The show was top in the ratings, and he didn't feel he was getting, the money that he deserved, so he stopped working. He left. And there are 9 episodes, 8.5 actually, where Grady's the lead, where Grady moves into the house with Lamont. Lamont being, of course, Damon Wilson, who plays Lamont, his son. And he takes over for Fred while Fred is away in St. Louis. But in real life, Red Fox was like, fuck you, I want more money. And he and NBC and his agents were arguing and negotiating over Red Fox getting more money. And in the meantime, there was a deadline on getting these episodes done. So Grady was brought in to basically take over for Fred in episodes that had originally been written for Fred, but were altered to make Grady the guy. So Grady moved in with Lamont. That was the storyline. Fred was off. And those episodes aren't very good because, Whitman Mayo is no Red Fox. Whitman Mayo, funny in little doses and supporting character, but he can't run the whole thing. Damon Wilson was okay with working with him, but those episodes are not that great. And again, this was the guy that they pushed on him. So Leroy, Skillet, Don Bexley, Anna Esther, LaWanda Page, and Slappy White were kind of pushed to the side. Grady was pushed to the forefront. So there were obviously behind-the-scenes issues that were happening, and to the point where, like I said, the last couple of seasons, it was clear that Red Fox didn't want to be there. That's why they added the Sanford Arms, the hotel subplot. That's why they brought in Nancy Culp and all these other characters, because at this point, Red Fox was like, "Fuck you, pay me. I'm just going to show up, say you're ugly," while he's sitting in a chair. I was not happy at all, dummy. So, anyway, there are so many great episodes, and they had great guest stars, too. You remember the legendary B.B. King episode. Della Reese had an episode where they played, these were when they played themselves. George Foreman played himself on it. Lena Horne with Little Lame Lamont. Lena Horne showed up. So it had these great episodes. The B.B. King episode's probably the best one. Oh, man, the poor man's gone blind, where you find out that B.B. King wrote this book, and Fred thought that B.B. King wrote this book and loved Elizabeth, and that Fred took Elizabeth, the wife who passed away from B.B. King, and B.B. King came back to get him, but it was actually Esther who he was in love with. Oh, anyway, there was a misunderstanding. He was in love not with Elizabeth, but with Esther. You look as beautiful as ever. Oh man, the poor man's gone blind. So you got great guest stars. Now there are a ton of great episodes of Sanford and Son, and I know that we all have our favorites. And like I said, the first 3 seasons of that show, bar none, funniest show on TV. Virtually every episode in that whole stretch is great and memorable. But there are a ton of really unbelievable, great episodes. So I've got a few here, and I have my favorites as well. You got the Card Shark episode where Lamont is playing cards with these guys who are going to take him for all his money. You know, they're hustlers, and they're going to take him. And Fred is there trying to tell Lamont not to play cards with these guys. And he's trying to distract the guys and trying to get them to not rip off Lamont. And then after he loses all his money, Fred sends Lamont out to go get some more booze. And meanwhile, Fred sits down and basically takes all these guys for all their money. And one of the guys includes Ron Glass was one of the guys, Hucklebuck. And he not only took their money, he took their shoes, he took their Superfly outfits, their hats, he took all their money and all of that stuff, all their jewelry, their shoes, everything. So that's one of my favorites, where Fred basically turns the tables on these card hustlers. And then there's the Rated X, where Rallo, again, another great character, Rallo. And some of the characters, I didn't even go through some of the characters. Wait, you gotta go through the characters. I can't believe this. Rallo. You've got Rallo, who is just a ridiculously great character. And you got Rallo's great. You got Donna, who was Fred's fiance. You got Julio, played by the late great Gregory Sierra. He was the next door neighbor, who was the Puerto Rican. And of course, Fred thought the whole neighborhood was going to go to hell because the Puerto Ricans moved in next door. Mofongo. Now you got it, all that stuff. So you got Julio, you got Achu, played by Pat Morita. He was the Japanese guy who came in so that Fred could make offensive Japanese jokes. You got Janet, who was Lamont's girlfriend, who became the fiance. Janet's son was also a part of it, and other characters that came in. But Rallo was always like the best friend. He was Lamont's best friend, and Fred hated it. And then there are other supporting characters. One of my favorite characters is Dr. Caldwell, played by Davis Roberts. Dr. Caldwell was the doctor that they would call up to examine, them. Especially if, like, there was an episode called Whiplash where Fred gets rear-ended by a white guy in a Cadillac and decides that he's going to take him to court even though he's not hurt. And he puts on a neck brace and pretends that he has whiplash, and he wants to make all the money, get a whole bunch of money from this rich white guy in a Cadillac. And the doctor comes over to examine him, and it's Dr. Caldwell, who was played by Davis Roberts, one of my favorite characters ever. He comes in, he's a doctor, he's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, he's coughing the whole time, and they ask him, like, well, what's wrong? I don't know. Well, do you think in 2 weeks he'll be able to feel better? I don't know. And his cat, he was the doctor who smoked, he was in terrible shape, coughed all the time, and every question was answered with, I don't know. I mean, it was one of my... So Dr. Caldwell, the Davis Roberts, who was a great character actor, showed up in a ton of great blaxploitation movies and TV shows in the 70s, but I don't know. I don't know. Like, it would be something like, Doctor, am I going to feel better next week? I don't know. So, anyway, Whiplash, I mentioned that's a great episode. The Rated X one, that's where Rallo and Lamont go off to make a movie, and they discover that it's actually a porno movie. And then he and Rallo and Fred, they get arrested for being, on the set of a porno movie, and Aunt Esther has to bail them out. Fucking hilarious. And the scene where Aunt Esther shows up at the jail cell and they're whipping insults back and forth. God, LaWanda Page was so goddamn funny. I mean, and the episode where he's sick and he's in bed, I don't know. And he thinks he's dying, and Aunt Esther comes to visit him, and it's got the classic line, probably one of the most classic lines of all time. Fred is in bed, Esther comes in, and is like, man, I don't need you here right now, because he thinks he's dying. I don't need you. I don't need your ugly face in here. And she's like, who you calling ugly, sucker? And of course, the famous line that Fred delivers from the bed, you're so ugly, I could take I could take your face and stick it in dough and make me some gorilla cookies, which is of course one of the greatest insults of all time. I mean, like the inside, I could put some tracing paper over your face and make me a moose face, like that kind of stuff. Then you got Superflyer, where he had a cousin in St. Louis who died and is leaving him like $1,600 or something, but he has to fly to St. Louis to get it. Red Fox or Fred Sanford. So Fred Lamont get on a plane. He's terrified of flying. So it's basically Fred being terrified of flying. Pat McCormick, the giant stand-up comedian, has a cameo in that one. There is where Lamont buys Fred a pool table, and he basically turns the house into a pool room, and that's a hilarious episode. Lots of great Bubba lots of great Bubba, Skillet, and Leroy in that one. Lots of great stuff. Also, the episode where one of their friends dies, and they decide that they're going to party and have a great time, get a bunch of girls. That's some classic Leroy, Skillet, and Bubba and Grady right there. The episode where they're the old gray dudes, they ain't what they used to be. That's fucking hilarious episode. How about Lamont Goes African, where Lamont embraces his African roots and changes his name to what his African name would be. And of course, this is all like ridiculous to Fred. And that's a fantastic episode. Blind Melon Jelly. That's the episode where they've got the giant Blind Melon Jelly records that Fred loves to listen to, and Lamont wants them gone, so they donate them to like the library. But then they discover that they're worth money, so Bubba pretends to be Blind Melon Jelly. I want my daddy's records, his son. I want my daddy's records, Blind Melon Jelly records. Fantastic. How about the one where Griff comes to town? His old buddy Griff comes to town. Fred's buddy Griff, and says that he's Lamont's dad. There's that episode where you got and then you find out that he actually, his story was that Griff snuck into Elizabeth's bedroom while Fred was away in the army, but in fact he snuck into Esther's room, which of course is another hilarious moment with LaWanda Page in that one. There's the legendary one where Fred tells Lamont that he should fight a traffic ticket that he got. He got a ticket, and so Fred says, you got to go to court, you got to fight it. And so Fred becomes like his lawyer, and at one point berates a white cop. How come you don't arrest any black drivers? And I can't say what he says, but there's this. So Fred comes into the courtroom, basically it's all up for grabs, and Fred is representing Lamont and grills the white cop who gave Lamont the ticket. I can't say what he says, but sometimes that one doesn't get shown on TV because he drops the N-word a couple of times during it. But that's a great one where Fred becomes the lawyer. You get the Party Crasher one where Lamont and Rallo want to have a party, and they have these two girls, but they have a really shitty small apartment. But then Fred shows up with soup, and they love the onion soup and all this other shit. And Ripple, he shows up with Ripple. He crashes the party. That's a great one. All of the episodes with Julio are great. They're all great. When Julio first moves in, the whole Puerto Ricans are coming. That's the name of the one. The one where Fred will not finger the guy who he will not identify the crook who came into Julio's stuff and stole all of Julio's stuff. When Julio's family and his aunt and his mother and his cousin come into town. All great stuff. Then there's somebody comes in, breaks into the house, they leave a gun behind, and then Rallo and Fred and Lamont go to an antique store to pawn the gun. That's a great one. Goldstein, where they have an old rifle, where Lamont brings home an old Revolutionary rifle, and Fred is goofing around in the house, and he shoots through the front window, and there's a bullet in it, and they think they've killed their neighbor Goldstein. So they think Goldstein is dead. Hilarious. There's the one where Lamont brings home a commode, brings home a toilet, and then you get scammed by Dr. Smith from Lost in Space is in that one. But this commode is worth nothing. And I called the bank, the check's still bouncing. That's another great line from there. There is the suitcase full of money, where he brings home a suitcase that's full of money, a briefcase full of money, and the crooks come to claim it. I mean, that's been done. The Honeymooners did that. A ton of people have done that story before, and it's still funny when they did it. There is also the 3 Degrees when Fred starts to take over. Rallo manages this girl group like the Supremes. They're the 3 Degrees. Beautiful young ladies. They love Fred. He kind of becomes their manager. Here, ladies and gentlemen, the 3 Degrees, classic one. Lighthouse Keeper, or Mary Wilkes shows up. Mary Wilkes plays a maid who works in the house for a little while but doesn't do anything. Then there's the one I can't remember the character actor's name, but where this white bum shows up and is sleeping in the bathtub in the yard of the junkyard, and he claims that he hurt himself. So he's trying to take the Sanfords for money. He claims that he hurt himself, so he has to stay, and he stays in the house and is, waited on hand and foot by Lamont and Fred until they find out that he's faking it. So they feed him a bunch of beer, so he has to get up and pee. Classic. And then finally, my favorite episode, and there are so many I'm missing. There are like a ton of other episodes that I haven't mentioned, but my favorite episode of all time is the Wooden Overcoats episode, which is where Lamont brings home 2 coffins. And Fred won't have him in the house. He's very superstitious. He's terrified that bad luck is going to happen. You bring these coffins in the house, somebody's going to die. And that's got one of the greatest Slappy White moments ever, where Melvin comes in the house, he sees the coffins, he walks in, he goes, "Hello, Lamont. Hello, Fred." He sees the coffins, he turns right around and goes, "Goodbye, Lamont. Goodbye, Fred," and walks right out. Because they're both very superstitious. So he won't sleep in the house, so Fred's sleeping out on the truck. Lamont becomes very scared. There are cats running around and all kinds of crazy shit happening. But when he brings home the coffins, and the bad luck starts to happen and Fred won't come into the house to sleep, fucking hilarious. That's my favorite episode of all time. Pop, you asleep? When he keeps coming out because Lamont starts to get scared. The coffins are in the house. He keeps coming out and waking up Fred. "Pop, you asleep?" And Fred's like, "No, I'm checking my eyelids for cracks." "Oh, I'm checking my eyelids for cracks." Hit the lights go out. "Pop, the lights are up." "Well, change the fuse." "Well, where are the fuses?" "Where do you think they are? In the fruit bowl?" So, I'm sorry. I know every line of all of them. But Wooden Overcoats, the coffins, that's my favorite episode. But 50 years. And I remember as a little kid watching it, and then in reruns as I grew older, watching it on Channel 32. It was on at like 10 o'clock on weeknights, Monday through Friday. 10 or 10:30 or something like that, and I would watch that every night. I still watch it constantly. TV One shows marathons of it. There are streaming services that have it, that show it. I can't get enough of Sanford and Son. Whenever it's on, it makes me happy. I use the Sanford and Son theme for a segment that I did on my radio show called You Big Dummy, where I read real news stories of real dumb people doing real dumb shit, and I'm actually going to be bringing that segment back to my podcast as well. Red Fox was a national treasure. One of the funniest men that ever lived. Wasn't real good with his money. Wasn't real good with finances. But one of the most influential, one of the most important comic minds, one of the most important comic voices of all time, and one of the most important African-American artists ever. Red fucking Fox. Sanford and Son, 50 years. It just celebrated 50 years, and it's better than ever. And watching those episodes, there's hardly anything better than this. I love Fred. He's my friend. So anyway, happy anniversary to Sanford and Son. Lamont, Demond Wilson is pretty much the only living guy that's left of the main characters. I mean, you do have Hoppy and Smitty, the cops, the white cops, because you got Hoppy and Smitty, and then there was Swanee, was the original one, played by Noam Pitlick. So those guys are still around. The guys who played the cops are still around. But all the main characters have pretty much passed away, except for Demond Wilson. So I was lucky enough to have Demond Wilson on my show. I had Howard on my show, who played Officer Hoppy. I had him on my show, and I've devoted a lot of time over the years to Sanford and Son. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. So Fred says, "All right, dummy, we got to go watch Sanford and Son, dummy." I love Red Fox. He rules. All right, Sanford and Son, happy 50th.